all of you sincerely from the bottom of my heart for being so generous with your time to volunteer with this project. That's Vanguard Crew and Bank of New York, TD, and Lincoln alike. We really appreciate it. Serving underserved communities in the Philadelphia area is an issue and a cause that's near and dear to my heart. And we would not be here today were it not for, in large part, Evie's effort. She is the coordinator for pro bono services for small businesses and nonprofit organizations with Philadelphia VIP. And it's just been amazing to work with her. It's been a tremendous learning opportunity for me. She has deep roots in the community. She's done her graduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Evie, you are also an owl. I am as well. Shout out to Temple Law, and she's got significant volunteer service. So this is a woman who doesn't just talk the talk, but she has walked the walk, and I am going to leave it there. She's going to queue up what's going to happen today and perhaps share a little bit about um, um, the work of Philly VIP and introduce us to our trainer for this afternoon. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention, Evie, I was shocked when I saw in your LinkedIn profile that you and I are fellow woodwind players. You the bassoon, right?
Yes,
And I played clarinet until I got
clarinet
braces.
and sax. Yep.
I tease, I tell people that I used to have a gap like Michael Strahan, and when my children saw my high school graduation picture when they were toddlers, they said, "Mommy, you're missing a tooth." So I gave up the clarinet when I got braces in college. So
Oh,
that
man.
was a fun fact. I didn't know that until just yesterday. So go ahead, Evie.
Yes, woodwind player. I was very popular in high school, you can tell.
Oh,
Um,
same, big gap, clarinet. Yeah, I was popular too.
well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us this morning in honor of Financial Institution Pro Bono Day. And a big thank you to Robin for enlisting Vanguard to help co-host this very important initiative for Philadelphia's community development. Bit of housekeeping up front. As you can see in the top left corner of your screen, we are recording this training for archival purposes, and a link to this video will be shared with all of you either this afternoon or tomorrow, depending on how fast we can get it up on Vimeo. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, so please try to stay on mute and hold your questions until after Franny's presentation. Philadelphia VIP's mission is to leverage the powerful resources of the legal community to provide quality volunteer legal services and ensure access to justice for low-income Philadelphians. Some of you have already committed to assisting a local nonprofit with its incorporation or tax exemption filings, and for that we cannot thank you enough. If any of the other participants here today are interested in taking on a pro bono case sometime in the near future, whether for a nonprofit or even a small business, please reach out to me after this event to hear about our available opportunities. I'd now like to introduce our nonprofit expert for the day, Franny Riley, who is a big friend of VIP and has been for many, many years, and has generously agreed to give a presentation today on how to assist with nonprofit formation filings. Franny is a corporate attorney with her own firm, focusing on individuals, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. She has extensive experience counseling clients on corporate policies, best practices, and corporate governance. She has served as outside general counsel to numerous nonprofit organizations, advising on fiduciary duties, contract issues, compliance concerns, and general corporate reviews. In the public finance capacity, Ms. Riley has served as bond, borrower, I cannot say that word, institution, and underwriters counsel to clients, which includes advising these clients with the issuance, offering, structuring, remarketing, and restructuring of tax-exempt and taxable municipal securities and other debt instruments. Her firm is listed as a member on the Pennsylvania Office of General Counsel's general pool of qualified bond counsel firms. And with that, I will let Franny take it away.
Thank you, Evie. I appreciate it, and welcome everyone. I would like to, I'm really looking forward to working with you today so that you have a better understanding as far as, how you can help your clients. So I think just having the understanding as far as what nonprofits are, what the difference is between them and for-profit organizations, and then also really understanding, in the time that you have with your clients, what you can do to make a really large impact for them. So I have worked with Philadelphia VIP for a number of years now as far as teaching similar sessions. And I will tell you the feedback that, I've received through VIP has just been phenomenal. what you were able to do to help these organizations get themselves structured and really provide them with a solid foundation is just, it's amazing. So it's been a really great program. I have enjoyed working with Philadelphia VIP, as far as training and developing it. And it's really exciting to see what you can do. So, if you have any questions, along the way, please, let us at the end, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. So, please let me know, because I think that, it's something where I want you to feel very comfortable in going forward and working with your clients. And so for those of you that have taken on clients, thank you so much. Also, if you have taken a client and it's something, or you're considering taking a client and you're stuck on an issue and it's not something that you're sure of, Philadelphia VIP also has a really fantastic mentor program. So you can reach out to Philadelphia VIP, and they'll assign a mentor to you. And that is a person who will then help you work through those issues. So it's really, it's really great to see so many attorneys here and so many, people really excited and, ready to help these fantastic organizations. So with that, Evie, I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see it. Perfect, good. Any issues? Anybody? Okay, great. So let's get started. As far as an introduction goes, again, the main thing that I wanted to point out to you today, and we're not going to be able to learn everything about nonprofits in the little over an hour that we have, but the idea is just for you to become familiar and how to really issue spout with your clients. So, how are you able to understand this is something that nonprofits either can or can't do? This is something where nonprofits can get themselves into significant trouble. This is how nonprofits could potentially lose their tax exempt status. So again, it's not something where I want to just tell you this is how you form a nonprofit and you're able to, form it. But I think that it's really, using your time with the clients to really get them to understand, that once they get the nonprofit set up, the legal requirements don't just stop there. It's an ongoing, almost a startup and maintenance, to make sure, because what you don't want to happen is to have these nonprofits get set up and then not inform them that they need to be filing, a tax, a tax reporting on a yearly basis. And then after 3 years, they lose their tax exempt status. So it's really making sure that you're providing a good education to your clients to inform them not only once you get set up, but also these are the things that you need to do on an ongoing basis. So again, I bring up, there are different laws that govern nonprofits. So there's federal law, but there's also state and local tax requirements. So it's something, sometimes the idea as far as a tax exempt entity, when people think of that, they think this is great. I never have to pay taxes on any money that's brought in. And that is not true. And sometimes, it's also the idea that just, when you get these, when you get tax exempt status from a federal perspective, you then, depending on the states, but you then would have to apply for additional sales tax exemption in Pennsylvania. In Philadelphia in particular, you'll need to apply for real estate tax exemption. So just because you have this tax exempt status on a federal basis, there are also other levels of taxes that we need to consider. And then as far as making sure that the board members, that you're meeting with and or staff, make sure that they are also aware as far as what these laws are and how important it is to make sure that they continue to abide by them, and also to make sure that there's continuity. So putting policies in place, making sure that that the board follows these policies, making sure that when there's a transition from board members, that there's this continuity as far as sharing this information. Because again, the failure to comply with them can potentially even result in the loss of tax exempt status. So it's really important to make sure that, again, what we're doing is providing this solid foundation and getting your clients into good practices as far as this is what needs to be done in order to ensure that this is a well-run organization. Okay, so the first thing that I highly recommend as far as putting everything together is making sure that you have it's called document retention. But this is just a list of all of the documents that your organizations are going to need to have in a corporate minute book, which is just a really fancy name for a three-ring binder. So the first and foremost, the one of the best pieces of advice that you can give your clients is, if you're meeting with them or if you're talking with them and they're saying, I've got all of these documents, they're in different places, they're in different file cabinets. I think I might have one in an email. I'm not really sure where all the documents are. They need to go out to Staples or wherever, get a three-ring binder and get tabs, and then label the tabs in accordance with these different documents. So when you say to them, where are your articles of incorporation? They have the tab that says articles and then the articles behind it. And I think that this is such an important concept for individuals to understand, because the nonprofit organization is actually, it's a separate legal entity and it needs to be treated as such. So just as you would have your own files as far as your tax documents or your real estate documents or anything else that's important to you, the same is true for your nonprofit corporations. And so then what we can do is talk about what are articles of incorporations, what if we need to do an amendment. We can go from there. But again, this is the very foundation. So your organizations are going to be in all, depending on your clients, in different states as far as have they filed the articles? Are they considering filing articles? What's needed for the articles? Do they have bylaws? And what are bylaws? And so let's just take a few minutes to go over each one of these, so that you have a really good understanding as far as what these documents are and why they're needed. Because I really want to emphasize the why. So it's easy for me to just say, you need to have your bylaws. But I think that it's what's the most important part of that statement is just why you need to have those bylaws. So the first is the articles of incorporation and any amendment. So, that's your foundation. So when your organization comes to you, you ask for their articles, you take a look at them, and then what you want to make sure, because it's a little tricky in Pennsylvania in that you can file articles of incorporation for a nonprofit online through PenFile. The problem with the form, and it's something, I've brought to their attention, but it's, again, it's a process to get any types of forms changed, is that for the nonprofit, they don't have the private inurement, and they also don't have a dissolution clause. So the prohibition against private inurement, that just means when you're forming a nonprofit, you can't benefit individually from the nonprofit. So you want to make sure that, is this a nonprofit that's being set up, for the public good? So you might have someone, not here, but, if someone were to come to you and say, I'd like to form a nonprofit because I want to send kids, to Florida to give them the opportunity. Great, right? That sounds really good. And then you say, okay, well, what's your charitable class? So what types of kids are you sending? If your response is, well, I want to send my kids to Florida, so I want to raise money for my kids, that's not necessarily a reason to start a nonprofit, right? So again, I think that people just say, well, maybe people want to be generous. Maybe people want to send my kids to Florida because they've never been before. But that's not necessarily a reason to set up a nonprofit corporation. And so again, that's where your articles of incorporation, you have to understand what's the purpose of this organization. So why is this organization getting set up? And what is the charitable class of people? Are they children that have, illnesses? So you think about the Make-A-Wish. Are there, what are the reasons in which you want to set up this nonprofit corporation? So if you're working with clients that are thinking about setting up a nonprofit but haven't yet, what you want to be asking is, what is your purpose? What is your mission? Why are you setting up this nonprofit? Why do you feel that there is a need in what type of public good are you serving by setting up this nonprofit? And again, then you need to attach separate articles of incorporation. So There's the articles, which will say your name, your address, all of that information. But then there's 2 additional articles that you need to add. And one is the private interment. And then one is also the dissolution. So those are 2, those are 2 big articles that you need to make sure that are included as attachments. So if your clients don't have those, it could be that you need to file an amendment. So, articles of amendment to be able to include those types of, articles. And Evie, I can't remember if that's on the checklist, but if not, it's something I could send to you, just sample ones, and we can, make sure that everybody gets a copy to see, what they look like. So that's the articles. So once the articles are then filed with the Pennsylvania Department of State, what you have done is essentially create a separate legal entity that, that is a nonprofit corporation. So then can you say, oh, I've created a nonprofit, I'm done? No, absolutely not. That's one of the biggest mistakes is you hear, people say, well, I went online, I filed the articles, I'm now a nonprofit, I don't need to do anything else. So the nonprofit corporation, the articles, when you file that, it just means that you've established this separate legal entity with the intention that you don't plan on forming, that you don't plan on making a profit, that there's no shareholders. But in order to get the tax exempt status, you have to take an additional step. And that is filing either the form 1023, 1023 EZ, or form 1024. And again, that really just depends on the type of organization that you're looking to, help. So typically what we've seen is that this form 1023 EZ is the one that is now much more commonly used. And that's if your organization does not anticipate bringing in more than $50,000 a year in revenue. So if a client says, well, no, I'm thinking I'm going to get, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue because my mission is so amazing, I'm going to get grants, I'm going to, be able to get ways. I strongly recommend talking them through, the 1023 EZ, because I think that there is a concept out there that once you form a nonprofit, it's easy to get grants. But getting grant money is very, very challenging. So there are a lot of organizations that can use that 1023 EZ in order to be able to obtain tax exempt status. So once that's filed then with the IRS, the 1023 EZ, then they'll receive what's called an IRS determination letter. And that's the letter from the IRS that they should have that says, dear client, we now recognize you as a tax exempt entity. So again, that's something that's really important to make sure that you put in their files. And in their corporate minute book, so that they have a copy of that. So when they apply for grants, they will get questions as far as, well, where's your IRS determination letter? So again, that's something that you'll, be able to work with them to make sure, again, that they organize it and have the structure. As far as the bylaws go, so the bylaws are the governing document of the organization. So the bylaws are what says, this is how frequently we'll have meetings. This is who is allowed to join the board. This is, when the board will meet. This is, what we'll discuss, how the agenda is set out. This is, this is how we're going to actually run the organization. It's also really important if clients do share with you their bylaws that you take a look to make sure that they have an indemnification provision in there. So there are some organizations that have bylaws from many, many years ago. The issue with those is that there's not always language in there that allows for the organizations to then become indemnified. So if you're a director, if you're an officer, you're doing something on behalf of the organization, you're going to really be able to attract, good board members if what you are finding out is that that you have this indemnification language in there. So it just protects the directors and officers from actions that they're taking so that they, aren't concerned that all of a sudden they're going to get sued and lose their house for volunteering, for this organization. So that's really important. And then you're going to want to make sure that they also have any types of, annual filings that are needed. So, anything if they're depending on the types of funds that they're soliciting, do they need to, file with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Charitable Organizations? You're going to want to make sure what governmental filings have you made, to make sure, as far as whether or not you just this is again just a baseline. Go ahead, Robin.
Fanny, for the filings that you're referring to, is there a tool or a guide that you guys will provide us so that we would have a sense of what those filings are? I know personally, I don't have a sense of what those might be.
Sure,
What types?
absolutely.
Okay.
And I think there's a checklist
Okay. And
that
maybe I just glossed over it and wasn't paying attention. My apologies.
no, absolutely. And the thing is that, and again, you're just asking for it. So that's why there's the checklist there. And that way you can say, do you have bylaws? And it's really, I think that what I like to do with it, again, are you going to be able to solve every single problem for the client? Absolutely not. I think that it's really just, again, this is much more as far as issue spotting of, do you have bylaws? If you don't have bylaws, it doesn't get a check. And then that you need to take further action as far as, maybe working with VIP in order to get those bylaws developed. So I think it's really just, getting an understanding as far as taking an inventory. What does the client have? And then what does the client need to do as far as next steps? So you're really helping the client to identify, these are the documents that we have, these are the documents that we don't have. And now we have a better understanding as far as what we need to get and how we need to, work with VIP to be able to get those documents. The next would be any types of insurance policies. So do they have director and officer insurance? If not, again, I highly recommend that they get it. In Pennsylvania, on average, if there are no employees, usually for like a $1 million policy, it's about $600. So it's a relatively low cost in order to get directors and officers insurance. But again, for those of you who are either on boards or contemplating joining boards, I highly recommend that you check to make sure that they have D&O insurance, because it's something where, again, if the organization were to be sued, if it's a community center, or a swimming pool, or swim club or something like that, and something happens, you want to make sure that, that you have this director and officer insurance to make sure that you yourself are protected. And then also, you want to make sure that you're sharing that information with your client so that they understand, just because there is this legal entity, it doesn't necessarily always protect, the directors and officers if there's, if there are slip and falls or things like that, things that, that do happen. The next would be making sure, do they have any contracts or leases? And if so, what are those contracts and leases? So is there a lease for space? Is it lease, in a church basement in order to run their organization? Is it a lease with a community center? And I think just reviewing that just to make sure, what is this lease all about? Or they might just say, no, we have an agreement with this organization, and the community center is just letting us use their space. Well, it's really hard to develop a program unless you show that you have some sort of right to be there. So you wouldn't want it to be something where all of a sudden they can just kick you out and say, well, we no longer want to have this organization here with us. So that's why getting it in writing, having that lease, making sure that there's a good understanding who's got insurance in case somebody does slip and fall. So, because if you're working with a community center, you don't have a lease, you're hosting a program, something happens to, a child there, who's going to be responsible for paying medical bills? Is it something that, your organization is. Is it the community center? What is the agreement between you and the community center? And then the next is minutes of all meetings of the members, boards, and committees of the board. So again, this is really important in just making sure the nonprofit organization can't speak for itself. So that's why it needs to be written down as far as what decisions were made and who made those decisions. So again, as far as the meeting minutes go, you'll want to make sure, are they typing up meeting minutes? And then again, that's just a fancy word for making sure that, what was the date of the meeting? When did it start? Who was there? What was discussed? Did everybody vote for it? Did some people vote for it? Again, that's what the meeting minutes are. And then someone types it up and prints it out and you put it in your 3-ring binder. So, I think it's really, a lot of what you're doing is getting clients to understand that, there might be terms such as, meeting minutes. They might just not understand what the concept is behind it. So I think just walking them through, and again, establishing best practices for them. So, each time you hold a board meeting, write down who's there, write down the date, write down what was discussed, and write down what was decided, so that and then again, put it in your corporate minute book, so that you can really have a good understanding, as far as what the organization has done and has authorized. Any questions so far? Okay. The next is asking them if they've filed any IRS forms 990 for the most recent tax years. And the reason for that is that in 2006, the Congress passed the Pension Protection Act. And what that says is that if a tax exempt organization doesn't file tax returns, these 990 forms for 3 consecutive years, their tax exempt status is automatically revoked. And then it's a process as far as trying to get that tax exempt status back and reinstated. So you want to make sure that these organizations understand, even if it's filing what's called a 990N, which is just a very simple online filing saying we certify that we're still in existence. It's for organizations that have brought in a gross amount of less than $50,000. And again, it's gross, because I think a lot of times, people will say, oh, well, wait a second, we've brought in, $75,000, but we spend $74,000. It doesn't matter. As soon as you cross over that $50,000 threshold, then you start looking into, other forms of 990, and you can, once you're starting to bring in that kind of money, the IRS is thinking you can, work with an outside accountant or auditor in order to get those forms 990 completed. So that's, again, that's really important. And then again, just asking for any copies of any state tax filings. So it's it varies between nonprofit organization as far as what types of tax filings could be needed. So if you own real estate, you might have to pay Philadelphia real estate tax unless you filed for a separate tax exemption. So again, the idea isn't to become an expert in all of these different filings and documents. It's really just to ask, do you have a copy of any state tax filings? Do you sell anything? Do you file for state sales tax? It's really just starting to have that conversation with them, into thinking, what are some things that I could potentially need? And then as you go through the checklist, you'll be able to understand, for my recommended next steps, I recommend either, new bylaws be written to include an indemnification provision, or, a lease needs to be written with this community center, or they might need help in obtaining insurance policies, or the client might need help as far as, minutes, how to put together board meeting minutes. And so I think it's really just going through and making sure that you identify where there could be potential gaps for the organization, and then working with VIP to figure out how do we resolve some of those gaps. Any questions? Okay. So,
Sorry, I have a quick question. It might just be
sure.
too much detail. For nonprofits that have had their tax status revoked, is there like a time period as to when you can reapply to be reinstated, or when it just makes sense to reapply for new tax exemption?
Well, so the thing is that it's, I mean, I've worked with all organizations, all different types of organizations, as far as you always want to at least try to reapply
Okay.
for it. And the reason behind that is because if there is a gap as far as when there was no tax exemption, they would have to go back and potentially file what's called an IRS Form 1120, which is a corporate tax return. So the plan A should always be to apply for the retroactive tax exemption. And a lot of times, even, if it's been, a year, 2 years, whatever it
10
is,
years, for
yeah,
example?
10 years,
Okay.
exactly. The IRS, as long as you bring it to their attention and just say, we recognize this, we now have policies in place as far as preventing it in the future. We understand the importance. This was, minimal amount that we brought. The IRS is much more, understanding as far as let's work with you to try to figure out what we can do about this, as opposed to just saying, let's just like run screaming from this organization and not try to do anything to resolve it. Because then you have this organization out there that's tied to board members, that has these potential outstanding tax liabilities. So like ignoring it and trying to figure out something else is not the way that you want to go. It's really important to try to resolve it and try to make your best case possible as far as why the organization should get their tax exempt status not only reinstated but also retroactive, to when it was initially lost.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Okay. And again, if you're like, whoa, this is too much detail, I'm not sure, what does this mean? Definitely please stop, please stop me and let's talk through it, because it is, I've sat through trainings where I've walked away more confused than before I even started, and I do not want this to be one of them. So if it's something where you're just like, I'm not sure what this means, I don't quite get it. If it's a question that you have, most likely it's a question that someone else also has. So, please let me know.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Sure.
So you kept talking about the 3-ring binder and kind of having like a physical copy of all these documentation, but what would you say about having it electronically like stored?
You know what? I think that would also be great.
Mhm.
As long as there's also maybe another physical copy, and making sure that the
Right.
two are consistent, because as we know, things happen in the electronic world just like they do, if you have a physical copy, it gets lost, it gets outdated. But especially with the electronic, I've seen organizations that on their website have a tab for board members, and then it's password protected so they can log in to actually see the corporate minute book. And I think that that works really well. I think it just depends on how tech savvy your board and your staff are as far as
Mhm.
making sure that you're able to access the information. So Dropbox works, maybe like a OneDrive or something like that. I think just really making sure that it's accessible to everyone. Because there are some board members that'll say, great, I love Dropbox, I love OneDrive, I love, whatever the method is. But then there are others that'll say, I have no idea how to access this, so you just sent me a link that means nothing to me. So I think that it's really just making sure that you have both of those opportunities for people to be able, for your board members to be able to access the corporate minute book.
Okay. Thanks.
Do we have, do we have any, or should we have any expectation that these organizations that are coming through Philly VIP have already been, these types of documents and so on have already been reviewed with them?
No, so VIP typically does not review with them. I think that that's what they're, looking to you to just say, let's go through this checklist and see, like, do you, just even like like an inventory, like, do you have these particular documents? And just getting a better understanding. If you do have the documents, great, how do you use them? So if somebody were to say to you, yeah, we have bylaws, but we've never looked at them before. I think then that's a good opportunity for you to step through the bylaws with the organization to say, if the bylaws require meetings, do you have board meetings? How do you have those board meetings? Because again, I think that sometimes people just say, oh, well, we just email as a board. That's how we make our decisions. But in Pennsylvania, the law has not kept up with the technology, as it often doesn't. And so in Pennsylvania, the requirement for a board meeting is that everybody has to be able to hear one another. So Zoom works, conference call works. Obviously, right now, in-person meetings don't work because you don't want to advise them to, have large gatherings when they're not supposed to. But, so I think working with them to try to let them know, teleconference is fine, but just sending out an email saying like, hey, what do you guys think? Does this sound good? Isn't good enough because not everybody can hear one another. So again, do you have your meetings? Have you elected officers? How does anybody, if you, again, what you're trying to do is take them from, well, we all get together, we all get along, everybody agrees, we've all talked about these things, really papering that to make sure that the organization itself is protected. So if I'm acting as president of my organization, how do we know that? How do I know that I'm president? Was I elected? Was I elected at a board meeting? And then where are the meeting minutes that say that I've actually been elected to that position?
Great, thanks.
I just want to step in to say that, in your issue spotting, if you come across something that falls outside of the scope of like filing for incorporation and tax exempt status, like, oh, you really need to have a lease drafted with this organization, or you really need to have a contract, something like that. You don't have to, we don't expect you to solve all of those issues, but it's something that it's important for you to issue spot so that we can work with the client to find them a real estate lawyer, for example, to help walk them through acquiring property or negotiating a lease. It's all information for us to use on future cases with the client. So, you said you were going to do incorporation for this client, but then you also figured out that they actually needed to get insurance. You don't have to worry about that, but it's good to know that they have that issue so that we can help them in the future.
Were the clients provided this list of documents that they should have?
No, but you can share it with them if you want.
Yeah, your materials, the materials that we got were great. That's why I know that.
Feel free to share with your clients. We have, I can send it to them as well. We usually don't. We usually just send them to the volunteer, and the volunteer runs through the checklist with them. But we have no problem with you sharing it with your client.
Okay, thanks.
This is for Evie and for Martha. I'm sorry, was someone going to ask a question?
Yeah, I just have one quick question, just to circle, as long as we're asking questions. Circling back on the articles of incorporation, you had mentioned that we can file the articles online through pen file, but you had mentioned that it lacks a couple of things that you need to amend, one of which was the private inurement prohibition, and the other, I thought you had mentioned something about a dissolution clause.
Right.
I'm not sure if you're going to get to that, but.
Yep, so those are two clauses. So I'll send drafts of those clauses to Evie, and then if she can, I'll ask her to circulate it so that you have a good sense as far as what you're looking for. So what does a private inurement clause look like? What does a dissolution clause look like? And then you can make sure when you're reviewing the articles that they're in there. Because typically then when you're filing the 1023, either the 1023 or the 1023 EZ, they ask, do you have a dissolution clause? Do you have a clause, prohibiting private interment? And again, I've tried working with the Department of State as far as getting those forms changed so that at least they're included, because not everybody realizes that you need to actually include those two clauses if you want to take it to the next step and become a tax exempt entity.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Can I ask another specific question just about that Articles of Incorporation, the form? There's a question here, and for the client file that I have, they are currently a group of volunteers who want to become a nonprofit. And question 6 says, for unincorporated association incorporating as a nonprofit corporation only. Is a group of volunteers an unincorporated association, or does that have a very specific definition from a corporate law perspective?
Well, and that's a great question. So the idea is have they been operating for a number of years, or is this just a group of people coming together to start this? Because if they've been operating for a number of years, they might want to consider themselves some sort of unincorporated association, so that there's an understanding as far as these aren't individuals acting on on their own behalf, that they have come together to do this, again, for the public good, for the greater good. But if it's just, we're just starting out, we're trying to, get this formed, it's not necessarily an unincorporated association because they haven't really done anything. It's just, they've met to decide that this is something that they want to do.
So Carrie's question is a great segue to my own. In reviewing my own client file, I get the impression that in terms of it becoming a formal organization, that they are very early. I feel like they've been doing, I'm sure I'll find out that they've been doing the work, but haven't done this part. And so it feels to me that it's probably a situation where the client could walk away from this volunteer program with a list of to-dos before they're even ready to do the filing. And so my question is, especially for those of you who have clients where basically a one-person, two-person operation, how do we speak to them? I mean, it may seem lofty to say that you have to have bylaws or electing officers. What does that look like in an organization that's much less mature in terms of just getting started?
Yeah, and Robin, you bring up a really good point. One of the ideas that you could walk away from them to say is just maybe there is additional time that is needed in order, to further develop this. One option would be for them to partner with a larger nonprofit. So for example, there's the Philadelphia Foundation, where what you could do is set up a fiscal sponsor agreement. And that's really good for those organizations that are in this in-between stage. They're not quite ready to form as a nonprofit, but then they're also, they still have, great ideas and things like that they would like to explore. So what that looks like is working, and again, I'm just using the Philadelphia Foundation. All the counties have it. So where I live in Delaware County has a great county foundation. Chester County has a great county foundation. Montgomery County, Bucks County. So it's really, you could look to the counties depending on where the clients are located to see about having them set up what's called a fiscal sponsorship agreement. And what that means is that the Philadelphia Foundation is already set up as a 501c3. And then underneath it, what they can do is they can partner with these smaller organizations that maybe are not quite ready to be a tax exempt organization. So they don't have a board. They don't, it might be like, again, like one or two individuals. And it's a lot of work for individuals to get a nonprofit up and running. So the alternative option for them could be, okay, well, let's get them started as far as just partnering with, and the larger county foundation. And so then what happens is that these organizations enter into what's called a fiscal sponsorship agreement, in which they partner with the community foundation. And then they get the benefits of being a tax exempt status without having to go out and create their own organization. They're seen almost as a project of the greater nonprofit organization.
You can give me the name of the or partnering with a, I was listening to you, but I didn't write it down. I'm sorry.
Sure. The Philadelphia Foundation is just, a great example.
There are several others. There's like also the Urban Affairs Coalition. There's a lot of ones in Philadelphia. And I just wanted to step in to say that when you're reviewing that option with your smaller nonprofit, whether they want to actually pursue 501c3 status on their own or enter into a fiscal sponsorship, depending on your fiscal sponsor, the smaller organization under that umbrella organization might be restricted in how they're allowed to solicit donations. So that might be a consideration if a client wants to have total freedom in how many grants they want to seek or how many people they want to ask for individual donations, and their fiscal sponsor has a limit on that. That might be a reason why they want to actually go for the full 501c3 status on their own. But sometimes it doesn't matter to them, and they're happy to, and take a lesser role in exchange for not being allowed to solicit as many grants as they want.
Yeah, I was just trying to think through the idea of what does bylaws and roles of officers and all that, what does that look like in connection with a filing for a firm that's one or two people, that there have been no elections, there are no board minutes, there's no board, right? So I was just trying to figure out what that conversation looks like. So this is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. So the one option would be to try to expand the board. So try to, look to your circle and see who else would be interested in participating. But you can have a board of one or two. It's not best practices, and it's certainly not something that I would recommend. But, you can have that. So there's, if they're saying, yep, I want to move forward, I know that this is something that's going to be beneficial to my community. I don't want to have any constraints as far as my fundraising activities. I want to move forward. I want to set up, this nonprofit. They can still do that. You still, even again, that's where put everything into silos. That's the way I like to make sure that people think about it. So if you put it into silos, you have your nonprofit silo, and that's when you're acting in the nonprofit capacity. So you would hold a board meeting, you would elect yourself. And then there's that, as opposed to acting in an individual capacity where you're doing the fundraising on your own behalf. So it's harder and it's much more challenging when it's just one or two people, because it's a lot of work. But it's, it is something that can be done if that's the decision that they want to make.
And one last thing is, I often push my clients to do this. IRS best practices, it's not a hard rule, but I did find it on their website. The best practice is to have 3 or more board members, the majority of which are not related to each other. So we get a lot of churches and whatnot that are run by like husband and wife situations. And so therefore, if they only add one more board member, it's still the majority run by one family. So in the interest of having an organization created for the greater good, instead of just serving the interest of one person or one family, one household. That's why the best practices are to have a diverse board of at least 3 people that are not all familially related. So if that helps.
Yep. Thank you, Evie. And it's,
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you. So looking at the case file for my client, I see that one of the things they're looking for help with is establishing their bylaws. So I'm assuming they don't have it yet. And I'm wondering whether you have sample bylaws that you can share with us.
Evie, is that something that VIP does have?
Let me check. We do have a resources library for our nonprofit and small business clients. It has a series of self-help guides. And I do believe we recently created a guide on how to create bylaws, but I'm not sure if it includes like a template in there. I mean, if you Google bylaws templates, there are plenty of examples. If you even just go to a popular nonprofit organization on their website, they usually have a copy of their bylaws listed. But we do have, I believe, a guide on how to just craft bylaws from scratch on our website under the resources. So we go to get legal help, resources, nonprofits, self-help legal guides. So we have a couple of different guides, one of them prepared by the DC Bar Pro Bono Center on how to develop better bylaws. And then we have a new guide on how to draft bylaws. So yeah, we do have that on our website. It's not a template per se, it's more like a how-to guide.
And again, it is really important if you are doing the research, if you are, using the internet, just like everything else, people say, oh, I pulled this off the internet, this and that. And, but they like haven't changed the name, or it's an organization based out of California, or, I'm like, yeah, I could get my will off the internet. It doesn't mean that it's something that I'm absolutely going to do. So again, just be very mindful when you're, when you are using internet resources. I know that VIP has a really great library as far as, different tools for developing bylaws. But so I would absolutely recommend starting there first. If you're looking for what does this provision look like or something like that, you can look to the internet. But I always caution that, because again, I've seen, where it's maybe they've changed like the header of it, but then in the body, it talks about whatever organization they found it. And it's, it's almost worse to have bylaws that you're not adhering to than it is to just not have bylaws. So making sure that they understand if it says you will hold meetings every quarter, they have to hold the meetings every quarter. So the more you stop adhering to those, they call them corporate formalities, but it's really the more you stop following your own organization's rules, the less liability protection you're going to have. Because if somebody were to try to, again, like pierce the corporate veil, they're going to come in and say, your bylaws say you're going to meet 4 times a year, you've met maybe once. So I think that it's just something to make sure that if you're developing the bylaws for them, if you put the bylaws together, it would be so important to make sure that you have a session where you talk them through the bylaws. So it says this, do you understand what that means? Do you understand what a meeting is? Do you understand how the minutes are? How an election would work? I think that, those are really critical. Are there any other questions?
And I just dropped a link to both that guide on how to create bylaws, as well as our general resources page for other guides that we have to help nonprofits.
Okay, great, thank you. So again, the other thing is that if you're looking to bylaws, particularly if there are organizations that are not in the Commonwealth, the bylaws have to comply with the Pennsylvania Nonprofit Corporation Law. So it's not something where, you want to develop these bylaws that, maybe work in California, but are not, wouldn't be relevant in Pennsylvania. So as far as the bylaws go, it's a very state specific requirement. So if your clients were in New Jersey, or if your clients were in Delaware, you would want to make sure that you followed those particular nonprofit corporation laws in order to help them develop the bylaws. Any questions? Okay. And some of this we've already reviewed. So the idea behind it is just, these slides are much more in depth so that you can take a look and just see, okay, we've talked about, board meetings, board meeting minutes. How can I, why do I need to put that again? When I developed these slides, I really wanted to make sure that you have a good understanding so that you can go back and say, oh, wait a second, that's right. The board meeting minutes. Again, it provides a history of the board's activities. So what you don't want to have happen is have these meetings being held by the board. And then 2 years from now, somebody says, well, were we allowed to enter into that lease? And someone's like, yeah, I think so. I think we talked about it. Yeah, maybe like a year or so ago, I remember talking about it. That's why these board meeting minutes really are so important, is because they provide the record as far as what activities the nonprofit is authorized to take. And again, Robin, back to what you were talking about, that's where it really becomes tricky when it's just 1 or 2 people, because people are saying, did I act in the capacity of an individual, or was I acting as a board member and deciding, to move forward and deciding that this is, again, in the best interest of the organization. So Again, if your organization, this is in providing a solid foundation for your clients, they're going to look to see, you know, funders, lenders, you know, if you apply for grants, they're going to want to take a look at your board meeting minutes. So that's why it's important to make sure that you, you know, again, that you get your clients into the mindset as far as, you know, this is what you need to be doing. So, you know, the first 6 months, it might be really difficult for them to say, like, why do I need to do this? Oh, it's such a hassle. I don't feel like doing it. You know, and I get that, but it's almost like a training for yourself for good practices. Any questions? And again, this is just a much more detailed, like, what do they need to include? So what should be included, you know, what should be included in there? So, and just, you know, as an aside, so in addition to practicing law, I also started and run an education foundation for my area. So, you know, I will tell you, it's much easier to counsel clients as far as like how to do all these things and why you need to do them all, as opposed to, you know, having to do them. So I get that it might sound like, oh, this is so much work. Why do we really need to do this? And, you know, when I'm acting in the capacity of president of the organization, there are definitely days where I'm just like, I don't really feel like putting the meeting minutes together. I don't feel like doing this. But by having everything together and succinct and in good shape, it makes the organization run so much better. And it also makes it much more attractive for other board members to join. So if people say, you know, my time is much more valued because this is a well-run organization, it's going to be a lot easier to attract board members. Again, on an annual basis, making sure that the board has a meeting. So asking them, you know, at this meeting, are you electing your directors and officers? Now, again, will there be a presentation of an annual report? Probably not in the beginning stages of the organization. But again, it's really important to understand this is where we are, you know, this is where we've been, this is where we currently are, this is our plan for the next year, this is our plan for the next 3 years, this is the next plan for, you know, the next 5 years. I think really starting to put together the concept as far as this is what we want to do. So many people think, you know, well, we just start raising money and that's, you know, that's what we need to do. But people aren't going to give to an organization unless they truly understand what your programs and services are. So I think that even working with them as far as the articles go, getting a good sense of what's your mission, what's your purpose, why are you different than any other organization is going to be really critical. To understanding, you know, what it is that what you're doing and why people should give to your particular organization. This is the board manual that we talked about. So, you know, I think one of the suggestions had been to, you know, have this electronically, and that's really great. I think it's just, how can you make this accessible to all of your board members? And how do you make sure that, you know, any board member, so you have your one corporate minute book, and that is the official record of all, you know, of the organization. It's the history, it's the understanding behind it. And then you want to make sure that each board member has what I like to call a board manual, and just, or, you know, what is a best practice as far as a board manual. And that, again, is just when a board member joins, they get a board manual. And it talks about, this is what the articles are, this is the bylaws, conflict of interest policy, again, the mission statement and the vision statement. So what is the organization doing now? What is the vision, you know, 5 years from now? Where are we going? How are we growing? What is our plan as far as getting there? Those are things, you know, to all think about with your clients. And again, just the names, addresses, terms of office of all officers and directors. So, you know, are people, do we know how to contact other board members? If we're sending out a notice as far as a board meeting, do we know how to even get in touch with these people? So I think it's really helping to provide this structure, you know, around the organization. And then again, the IRS determination letter. So making sure that you have this, or, you know, this document that shows that you are legitimately a tax exempt organization. And then again, this is also in the checklist, but it talks about conflicts of interest policies. So the IRS is very diligent as far as making sure that, that organizations don't have what's called a conflict of interest. So if you have a board member, let's say, for example, you're working with the board, they're having a really large event eventually, right, coming up, and you have a board member that says, great, I'm a videographer, I'll videotape the event and I'll charge you half of what I normally charge people. Well, that might sound like a really great deal, right? The problem with that is that the board member acting in the best interest of him or herself, or is the board member acting on the best interest of the organization? So the board member could be a terrible videographer that's got a business that nobody wants to go to because, he charges exorbitant rates and very low quality. Or you could have somebody who, again, it's just that's not going to do a great job. So it's, in your conflict of interest policy as a board, you want to look to other, you might have this offer come up, but the person, that's offering it should recuse him or herself from any of the decisions. And the board should go out and act independently and just say, if this person is going to charge us, is this a reasonable, price for getting these types of services? So again, the conflict of interest policy, because before the IRS has said no private endowment, the conflict of interest policy is in place to make sure that the organization, doesn't have somebody that's self-serving on the board. So again, it's really something to keep in mind as you're talking through with your clients, because so often people think, I'll join a board, it'll be a great way to get my business out there and things like that. But if you're using, your board position just to, try to solicit business, through within the organization, the IRS frowns on that. Any questions about that? Okay. And again, just some of the other policies, I'm not going to spend a significant amount of time because I want to make sure that we are mindful of the time, but these are just various policies that, again, are good practice. So it's something, not that you're going to draft all these policies, not that you're going to review all these policies, but I think that it's really making sure that, you ask the clients, are these policies that you actually have? So, one in particular is just the gift acceptance policy, because sometimes, let's say, for example, you're a new organization, you're starting up, and someone says, oh, hey, I've got a plane that I'll donate to the organization. And, maybe as the board president, you're like, great, we could, a plane, that's amazing. Well, if you're an all volunteer organization and you don't have any, if you don't have any space, you're not renting any place, where will you store that plane? Is the plane functioning? Is it something where someone's just going to dump off something to you? So again, you want to make sure that you have this gift acceptance policy in place so that you have a good understanding as far as what gifts are we allowed to accept, because what gifts can we actually do something with? Okay. So I don't know if any of your organizations have employees just yet. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I think the big thing is just making sure that they're that the individuals that are working on behalf of the, that are working on behalf of the organization, do they understand either that they're paid or, either as an employee or an independent contractor, or do they understand that they're volunteers? So the issues that some of these organizations run into is that they ask people for help, and then they're getting the help, and then they're suddenly presented with an invoice for these particular types of services. So I think that, working with your clients to make sure that it's very clear, if you're asking for help, do you have a contract in writing with that person? Does that person understand that they're, doing this on a volunteer basis? Does the person understand, either that they're an independent contractor? Is the person looking for health insurance? Again, I think that that's something just to touch base with your clients to say, do you have any employees? And if not, do you make sure that your volunteers understand that they're doing this on a volunteer basis? Are there any questions about that? Okay, great. So again, we'll keep going as far as the tax matters go. So as far as tax matters go, again, we talked about the the Form 990 that needs to be filed. So just even asking your client, have you ever filed a 990 if they're already established as a tax exempt organization? If their answer is no, then you need to work with them as far or advise them that they need to do this 990 filing, right away in order to make sure that they don't get their tax exempt status revoked. And I know that we had talked about what to do if your organization's tax exempt status has already been revoked. And, and again, the IRS has a process as far as how to get reinstated after revocation. So, that's, again, something that you'd work with your clients as far as how to get them reinstated, for that tax exempt status. But for the reinstatement, the one thing that I would like to emphasize is just, as you're getting reinstated, you also want to make sure that you ask for the reinstatement to be retroactive to when you initially lost your tax exempt status. So let's say, for example, if, 4 years ago today, my organization lost its tax exempt status. If I get reinstated, today, there's still a 4-year gap. So when you're applying for that reinstatement, you also want to ask for the retroactive reinstatement. So not only will I get reinstated today, but then you'll get reinstated as of 4 years ago. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the other things, again, as far as, any type of corporate employment, sales tax issues that might come into play. So if your organization sells, t-shirts, is it something that they potentially would need to pay sales tax on? So we're going to talk about it a little bit later. Or if not, is it something where they were able to get a sales tax exemption for those t-shirts? So that's, that's again, you're not going to solve all of the issues for your clients, but I think it's just really making sure that they're aware as far as, do you sell anything? And if so, do you collect sales tax on it, or, or do you pay sales tax on it? So just because it's a tax exempt organization, it's a little misleading to think that it's, that it's something that you don't pay any taxes on whatsoever. And then the big one is really the local real estate taxes. So either in Philly or, or somewhere in one of the surrounding counties, one of the questions that you want to ask is, did you apply for tax exemption for the real estate holdings that you might have? So if you own a building, if you own a community center, have you applied to get an exemption from the local real estate taxes? Because again, it's an extra step that you have to take that not everybody knows, that you have to take. So it's something that you should definitely, be asking, asking your organizations about. And again, it's not something that you're going to be able to solve for them, necessarily during this session. But just as Evie had mentioned, it's really important for you to just be able to identify it and say, oh, hey, this is, this is an issue. They own, they own a building in Philly, and the next step would be, to apply for that real estate tax exemption. Any questions?
I do. Speaking of extra steps, because it's really great that you mentioned sales tax exemption as being another extra step on top of applying for tax exempt status, because a lot of clients don't realize that, and then they get charged sales tax. Like, wait, I thought it was tax exempt. So this question is actually on behalf of one of our volunteers, HB, and his client actually already has incorporation, already has tax exempt status, even has sales tax exemption. But now the last filing that they want help with is becoming getting a certificate of becoming a charitable organization in the state of Pennsylvania. So can you touch on how that process is and where that fits in with the whole incorporation filing process?
Sure, absolutely. And so then what they're looking for is to file their BCO 10, is that right? That's the Bureau of Charitable Organizations Form 10. So again, it's called the BCO 10. And again, it's really just, it's a form, excuse me, it's a form that you file. The Bureau of Charitable Organizations is just going to want to make sure that, are you a tax exempt status? Is this, what types of solicitations are you going to do? So again, we had talked about from the IRS's perspective that, on a federal level, the IRS is monitoring, tax exempt status of these organizations. Well, on a state level, the states have found that some of these, and again, a lot of these laws are kind of based out of organizations and or, individuals abusing the system. And so now states are saying, hey, wait a second, if there are these tax exempt organizations within our state or our Commonwealth, we want to make sure that we are also aware of them so that if we receive complaints or things like that, we are able to then respond to them. We know who to contact. And so again, one of the requirements is then to file what's called this BCO 10 form. And it provides you have to submit your articles, submit your bylaws, submit your IRS determination letter, and really explain what some of the fundraising activities are that you're going to be doing within the Commonwealth. So I think that, again, if you have any questions, it's really, you can also reach out to Evie. Evie will work with you as far as getting assigned a mentor. And I can't emphasize enough, how great the mentor program is through VIP. I think that it's really, like we're not going to learn everything, in this hour, slightly hour plus. And so you're going to walk away from this and suddenly your client's going to ask a question and you're going to be like, I'm not really sure what the answer is. And that's where VIP does a really amazing job as far as connecting you with a mentor who can help you, step through, some of these questions.
Evie, can you speak to that point? Because this is a great one. So, once we're released from this training and each team is going forward to support these clients, I'm assuming that any individual team who has a need for mentoring, it should be coming directly to you for that, and that you and or someone else in Philly VIP will make those connections happen in terms of a mentoring lawyer or firm. Is that fair? Okay.
It is fair, but I will say that for our nonprofit and small business matters, the mentorship pool is stretched a little thinner than it is for our individual and family legal cases. So there aren't a ton of mentors for me to draw from or contact, which is kind of why we're doing this training, is because we don't really have a lot of nonprofit volunteer attorneys on deck to help these clients. But there are, nonprofit law firms in the area, such as Franny's, that I can reach out to those types of individuals and see if they're available to at least answer, a couple questions here and there, as opposed to taking on a whole matter like you guys are. So yeah, we do have a mentor program. It's very robust, but mostly in other areas of law, but I definitely will do my very best to connect you with someone who can answer your questions.
Right. And so with that in mind, one of the things that I schedule for Vanguard Crew, and, I certainly am open to extending that call to our friends from the other firms who are on this call, was to, be able to get together. Maybe we can kind of crowdsource if we find ourselves having a similar issue that's outside of our expertise. Then we can, elevate that as a broader issue, and then that mentor can serve the larger group, as opposed to having a bunch of questions. And I don't know that to be the case. Just for transparency for the Vanguard team, I haven't seen all of your client files, so I don't know all the issues. But that's one of the goals of the debrief call that I scheduled, for us to, if you have an opportunity to go through it and we all see that we need, help with X, that we could elevate that as, one request and try to handle it as a group, as opposed to a bunch of individuals.
That sounds like a great plan.
Franny, can I ask 2 tax questions quickly while we're still on this topic?
Sure.
Okay, great. So the BC 010, is this something that we should anticipate that all PA charitable organizations, tax exempt organizations will need, or only if the client requests it?
Well, so the BCO 10 is not something that is done right away. So it's not done simultaneously, with with your with your initial tax filing. So and right now the IRS, when you file, even when you file the 1023 EZ, the one that I most recently filed and received back, it was about 7 to 8 weeks from the time that I received the notice that they received it. So I know that the IRS says, it'll be about 6 weeks till you hear back this and that, but the mail's been slower than normal. Everybody's working remotely. And so all of those timeframes have been extended. So I'm not quite sure as far as, how long the commitment is, with your clients, but if it's a matter of we're getting the tax exempt status, that typically that tax exempt status would end, once they get their IRS determination letter. So it's not necessarily something that you automatically would, apply for the BCO 10, simultaneously with the 1023 EZ. So first you get the federal tax exempt status, and then you would recommend to them, filing for this BCO 10.
Okay. And my other question is, this organization does not yet have 501c3 status, but they have partnered with another charitable organization in order to secure a grant that they anticipate using for charitable purposes. They've also done some fundraising, again, intended for charitable purposes. So I'm curious, with respect to the grant and with respect to the what they have earned through the fundraising, how should they be treating that for tax purposes at this point? Should they be filing like a regular corporation income tax return, or how should they handle that?
So you bring up a really great question. Thank you. So as far as that goes, remember when we were talking about beforehand the concept of this fiscal sponsor agreement and relationship? That's exactly what they are right now, is in a fiscal sponsor relationship. So from a legal perspective, the money should be coming, any fundraising, any grants should be going to the nonprofit organization, the tax exempt organization. And then there should be, when we're talking about the concept of contracts, there should be a contract in place between this organization, your client organization, and the nonprofit organization that, states that the nonprofit organization agrees to serve as the fiscal sponsor for this, for your client. So that should be in place. And then it's the fiscal sponsor entity that is the one that is actually doing the tax filings, because they are the ones legally that are receiving the money.
And as a follow-up, so what if they have a fiscal sponsorship currently, but they're looking to sever that sponsorship in order to pursue becoming their own independent 501c3 entity? How do they handle the filings in that tax filings in that situation?
Sure, absolutely. So the fiscal sponsor, so the nonprofit organization, cannot release those funds until the new organization has received their tax exempt status. So they can't, once the funds come into a 501c3, they can't then be released until the other organization has a 501c3 status. So the client would be getting the 501c3 status while they're still under this agreement with a nonprofit organization. Once they then receive their tax exempt nonprofit status, the funds can then be moved from the nonprofit to the new 501c3. Any other questions? Okay. Insurance, again, directors and officers insurance is so incredibly important, just because things do happen, right? People do slip and fall. Kids do, you could say, well, we're just putting a playground together. We're, building a playground. Well, kids fall off playground equipment, right? And so it's important to make sure that you have this directors and officers insurance to protect your directors and officers who are volunteering their time to run the organization. Again, depending on the level, the stage in which your clients are, there could be a need for general liability insurance. If there's, auto insurance, if there's property insurance, if there are employees, disability and workers' comp insurance, cybersecurity, depending on how they're storing some of their information, depending on if they're, potentially helping children that have medical issues, if they're storing any type of HIPAA related information. Again, they need to start thinking about, cybersecurity and how that information's protected. Fundraising activities, donor acknowledgement letters are so important. So making sure that the organization then sends out what's called a donor acknowledgement letter. And it's really the letter stating we've received and acknowledged, your donation and the amount of, $100, whatever it is. And it's also a really good way, some clients might be like, oh, now I've got to write this donor acknowledgement letter, but some also use it, to help themselves continue to solicit funds. Like, thank you for your donation. It's being used for this. Because of your donation, we're able to, continue our programs and services. Any future donations can also be made, through our website, through Facebook, whatever it is. If you get your clients thinking that this is not just a single purpose, as far as, you have to just acknowledge it, but also like how to use it as a more so like a marketing tool to be able to, continue obtaining different, different funds. Make sure that your donor information is confidential. So, if you're storing your donor information, if they're keeping a list of all their donors, making sure that, somebody doesn't then post the spreadsheet of all your donor information on your Facebook page or something like that. Really, is it, even if it is your donor information password protected and who has access to those passwords, is really important. Contracts. Again, making sure that you have copies of all your contracts. I said, copy services, but if you, even with your volunteers, do you have some sort of volunteer agreement where your volunteers agree to keep any information that they learn confidential? Is it something where you have a contract with your volunteers as far as, the understanding that they're serving in a volunteer capacity, that they aren't going to be expecting payment for some of the services that they're providing? That would be really important, I think, to have for your volunteers. Real estate, we talked about it. Do you have copies of mortgages, deeds, real property leases? How does your organization know that it is legally allowed to be on property that is not potentially owned by the organization? So is there a lease? Is there some agreement in place that allows your organization to use the property at a specific, for a specific time and on specific dates? Intellectual property, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the intellectual property, but I think just if your client develops pamphlets, brochures, things like that, tell them to put the C with a circle around it and the date that just shows that they understand that they have copyrights in that particular, pamphlet. Let's just say, I just want to make sure we are mindful as far as the time goes. The things that could definitely jeopardize tax exemption, again, not filing your Form 990. If you don't do that for 3 consecutive years, you can get your tax exempt status revoked. It's an automatic revocation. So it's not as though the next day you say, oh, I should have done this, I'm so sorry. It's an automatic revocation from the IRS. So then you have to go through the process as far as filing to get it reinstated. Then the private inurement, we talked about lobbying, political activity. I can't begin to emphasize that enough. This is a very contested political climate that we currently live in. And so, your organization might be like, candidate ABC, it would be best for our organization. We're going to put his or her lawn signs out on our, on our property where, facility is. That's engaging in political activity. The IRS has a prohibition against nonprofits engaging in political activity. Who's going to tell on you? Obviously the other candidate, right? Like always the other candidate. People are like, oh, we can just put a sign up. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to, care about it. And the other political party and or, affiliates will always report on you. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Business income, again, if you're selling t-shirts and things like that, we can talk about it. Why are you selling them? Is it to further your mission? If not, from an accounting perspective, it could be something that you have to pay sales tax on. And then last thing I'll talk about, because again, I want to make sure that we are mindful of the time, is just the Pennsylvania requirements for certain volunteers. So making sure that if your organization is working with children, making sure that they understand that they're that they're volunteers, that they have background clearances, and and that they have mandated reporter training for any types of contact with children. Any questions? Okay, so you'll also see again fiscal sponsorship model. And I know that it might seem like a lot that we have just discussed, but again, if you have future questions and things like that, once you get started, again, there's a really great mentor program. And it's I think it's really important to know just what an incredible impact you are having for these organizations and what these organizations are doing for their community. So it's not just a matter of you just helping the organization. It's really important to think about, even from a bigger picture, how many individuals these organizations are also then helping.
I have one more question for you guys. I know we're at time, but this fiscal sponsorship model seems like it might be a good, I'm concerned about a chilling effect for the clients who are not quite ready for all of this, whether it be because of the size of the organization or what they have not yet done. But would it be a fair statement to say that entering into these types of relationships can also help them to develop the acumen that they may need in terms of all of the pieces that they need to have in place to properly file for exemption status and to file for corporation formation documents and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, even now more than ever, when funds are incredibly limited and, even finding donors is a struggle. I have recommended this fiscal sponsorship model to a lot of organizations that are just starting, just because again, they can really grow and develop under this fiscal sponsorship umbrella and, learn how do you make connections? How do you get out there? Again, how do you network? How do you find board members that are equally interested? And is this something that really is sustainable? If it's just one or two people and they lose interest, then what happens? Then they're going to have to pay the money to get it dissolved or run the risk that they have this entity out there, tied to their name. So I think that, this is definitely a really good model to get them started.
Well, thank you, Franny. That was incredibly detailed and helpful. And I'm glad we were able to pepper questions throughout because we are at time. We're not going to get kicked out, but I'm glad that we were able to field some questions throughout. I mean, I want to give some space right now if there are any last questions before we let you all go and start to connect with your clients. If you have some, anyone, you have the floor right now, if you have anything else to ask.
Thanks very much. This was very helpful. Appreciate it.
Great.
Well, I just want to thank all the volunteers from all the companies, if they're still on. I can't see all the participants anymore, and to thank both Evie and Fanny for the support, the content, all of it. I'm just full of gratitude this morning. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to us with this partnership. And so, yeah, I'm going to let you all go to, start. If you haven't already reviewed your case file, do that. If you haven't already connected with your client, to just introduce yourselves and, get started on signing an engagement letter and whatnot. I'll let you all spend the rest of the afternoon doing that. I will follow up with a link to this recording and follow-up survey and anything else, just so that you're able to reply to that and contact me if you run into any issues as you start, as you embark on your client representations. But thank you again to Franny and Robin for helping put this on today, and thanks to all of you for coming here and for committing to helping our local economy. And with that, have a great rest of your day. And, stay in touch with me if you have any questions, feedback, issues that come up in the next couple of days.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
take care, everyone.
You.
Bye.